Good to see all of you today. It's good to be here in worship with you, and we just welcome you. So glad you decided to join with us and be here today to worship the Lord in spirit and truth. We do come today to acknowledge the fact that yesterday was the 4th of July. Today's the 5th of July. But we celebrated our birth of our nation yesterday. And so along with that, oftentimes we like to just acknowledge those who have served. And so many, I know that there are those who are here today who have served our country through one of our branches of military. We also acknowledge that, those who serve through the branches of military help to make our nation what it is today. But we also recognize, so thank you to those who have served, and I'm not going to have you to stand or anything, I'm just going to say thank you, and we're going to sort of applaud for everyone in a moment, but also recognizing so many of our public servants that serve today in various lines of work and duty, and it takes a lot of folks to make our nation what it is, and to keep our nation the greatest nation on the face of the earth. And so we just recognize that. And so for that, let's just take a moment and just give thanks to God for all those who have served and continue to serve our nation today. Pastor Chris, you come sing for us, and then after he does, we'll continue with our congregational singing.
Tomorrow all the things were gone I'd worked for all my life. I had to start again with just my children and my wife. I thank my God above to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom and they can't take that away. I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. Of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, from Detroit down to Houston, from New York to LA. There's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say, proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I'll gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the
Today we have a special speaker for us today. Trip Finch and his family. Trip is over here. His family is back there. But anyway, Trip and Julia and Hannah and Jacob and Lizzie and Rebecca are all here from Oregon. So we welcome you guys. We're glad that you're with us today. Hannah's even sitting up here joining in with the praise band this morning and playing a cajon. So anyway, we're so thankful that she's joined with us up here for that. But look, we're so glad that you guys have made the trip across country, and we continually pray for you all. Pray for your ministry, your family, and just the difference you're making there at Willow Creek Baptist Church in Hettner, Oregon. Been there 5 years, August the 1st. So a nice, strong ministry there. And I know that you guys dealing with the same thing we're dealing with, right? It's nationwide. The coronavirus is nationwide. But so as we go to the Lord in prayer today, Trip, we pray for you. We pray for you as you preach today and your ministry there in Hettner.
Now
Such a pleasure and an honor to be here joining you in worship this morning. Just want to thank Clay for opening up the pulpit, giving me the opportunity to come and share with you this morning. Longmire Baptist Church will always hold a special place in my heart. It's a place where I first was introduced to Christ. It's a place where I accepted Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior. And I am where I am today because of many of you sitting out here that I see, because you put up with my antics and mission friends and RAs, and you were there on youth committees and doing all kinds of things. And you probably never thought, what are we doing this for these knuckleheaded kids who get on our nerves at times? Don't ever discount the importance of children's ministry and youth ministry. You never know what God might do, what God can do, and I think I'm a living testimony to you today of that. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being there for me. I love you dearly more than you know. Let's turn our attention today to the Word of God. If you have your Bible or you got your smartphone with your Bible app on there, just don't play Roblox or Minecraft or any of that stuff. Make sure you only stay on the Bible app and open it up to Deuteronomy chapter 3. Deuteronomy chapter 3. We're going to be in verses 21 through 29. Have you ever had something turn out unexpectedly? Something that happened in your life that ended up in a way you did not expect? How many of you started out the new year 2020 with a bang, and now you find yourself in a whimper as the things that we have thought were going to happen never happen, and we find ourselves in a situation now where it's like, what in the world is going on? It seems like we live in a day when the unexpected is a daily thing, sometimes even an hourly thing. Now that's the coronavirus and all that business, but maybe a little more personally, have you ever had something happen in your life and events turn out in a way that you did not anticipate? Maybe even events turned out in a way that was tragic, or you received news that was devastating. Maybe faced with a diagnosis of cancer or diagnosis of an illness, or had a loved one go through that. Or maybe you've experienced a separation or divorce. Or maybe you've experienced what I would call the probably nuclear bomb, worst thing that could ever happen to you, the death of a child. Or something like that, something tragic, truly tragic, come into your life, it hits you blindsided. What do you do? What do you do in those situations? Have you ever found yourself in such a quandary? Maybe you are experiencing that today. If you are in good company, because Moses experienced the unexpected. Moses went through a situation where he was facing the prospects of not getting what he thought would happen, where events transpired where he was not able to do something that he had hoped and planned for. You got your Bibles open now to Deuteronomy chapter 3. I'm going to read verse 21 through 22. I'm reading out of the Holy Christian Standard Version, and follow along with me in your text. It says, I commanded Joshua at that time, your own eyes have seen everything the Lord your God has done to these two kings. The Lord will do the same to all the kingdoms you are about to enter. Don't be afraid of them, for the Lord your God fights for you. The word of the Lord endures forever. Lord, thank you so much for the truth of the text. Thank you for giving us the text to speak to us in season and out of season, and in good times and in bad times. Father, I pray that as we look to your word this morning, that you would open our eyes to what it is that you would have to reveal to us. Father, I pray that you would let us put to the side all the things that distract us, all the things that seek to keep us from hearing your voice. Speak loud, speak clear this morning. Father, we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. First thing I want you to see this morning, number one, is God can. God can. In Deuteronomy chapter 3, the Israelites were just beginning to enter the promised land. They were on the cusp of entering into the land that God had promised them. They had been wandering in the wilderness for almost 40 years, and they were finally there at the finish line. And right when they are approaching the finish line, they encounter two great enemies, two Amorite kings, it says in the text if you were to read back. in chapter 3. But God miraculously delivers them into the Israelites, and they achieve military victory over them, and they are now going to give this land to two tribes, the tribe of Reuben and the tribe of Gad. Now that might seem obscure to you, but what that means is there's two tribes of Israel that are no longer going to be slaves in Egypt. They're no longer going to be nomads wandering through the wilderness. They're going to have a permanent home in a permanent place in their minds forever. And they are starting to see the vision of God come to pass. And Moses takes Joshua aside, and Moses says, Joshua, do you see what God has done? Do you see how God is starting to bring us into the land He promised? God can do anything. He can even defeat our enemies for us. Joshua, trust God. You're going to lead God's people. But then Moses, he steps back and he says, that's for Joshua, and that's not for me. We're going to get to that in just a minute. But first, let's stop right there. Have you ever been in a place in your life where you're almost there? It seems like you are about to retire. You are about to graduate from school. You are about to do something. If you've ever been to a wedding ceremony, you can see that kind of feeling on the face of the bride and groom. They've waited for this day for a long, long time. The florist is starting to arrive on the wedding day and place the flowers. The photographer is there recording the event. The caterer is starting to bring in the food, so the building is filled with the odors of spicy meatballs and fresh sliced cheeses and delicious cake. You know, it's not much time, but I am starting to get hungry here. And all this stuff is coming together, and the ceremony is there, and you know, and they know, we've waited for this for a long time. It's finally happening. You can just see it on their faces. Maybe you've experienced it as you took a new job. Maybe you started a new career and you went into the office, or you went on the job site the first day and they issue you your computer or your cell phone or your tool belt and screwdrivers or whatever it is, and you think, this is going to be great. Look at what God is doing. That's the kind of place that Israel is in chapter 3. They are on the cusp of finally achieving what God is doing in their life. This is really happening. Have you ever had that feeling? This is really going to happen. I'm really going to finally get to retire and enjoy life and enjoy the grandkids or whatever it is. God can. But then, there's always that but then. Don't you hate that? But then something happens. They find themselves, or Moses finds himself asking, God, please. God can. But number two, sometimes we say, God, please. Look at your text again in verse 23 through 25. It says, at that time, I, being Moses, begged the Lord. See that word? Begged. Begged the Lord. Lord God, you have begun to show your greatness and power to your servant. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can perform deeds and mighty acts like yours? Please let me cross over and see the beautiful land on the other side of the Jordan, that good hill country, and Lebanon. Moses sees what God is doing for Joshua. He says, this is what we've been waiting for. This is what I've worked my whole life for. But Moses knows that he is not to enter the promised land. If you were to rewind in your Bible and go back, and I'm not asking you to turn there, but if you were to look into Numbers chapter 20, the backstory is that in the wilderness of Zin, they had been wandering out there, and Moses was leading the children of Israel, and they ran out of water. And when they run out of water, this is a bad situation because they can't water their livestock. They can't have water to drink. It could be a deadly situation. It's not like out here where there's a creek or a pond. And by the way, it's so green out here. I can relate to this because the place we live at, it is dry, and if you don't have water, you are in a bad situation. And so they come to Moses and they start complaining. But this is not just are we there yet? Are we there yet? You ever heard those complaints on a road trip? Are we there yet? This is Moses, what are you doing? You lied to us, Moses. You told us you were taking us into a land of milk and honey, and here we are, we're going to starve to death. We don't have water water to drink. We were better off as slaves in Egypt. And Moses and Aaron, they go to God and they ask God, God, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? This is a bad situation. And God says, this is what you do. Moses, I want you to go and I want you to speak to this rock. And when you speak to the rock, water will come out and you will have water to drink. And so Moses, he goes up to the rock. He gathers the children of Israel, but he does something different. He grabs his staff and he says, let me tell you something. You all are a bunch of sorry rascals. I'm sick and tired of your complaining. Have you ever done that to your kids? I've never done that to my kids. Okay, you say, I'm tired of this. I have had enough. And then he takes his rock and boom, he strikes the rock and water comes out. This was bad. It's never a good thing to tell someone what you really think of them. Okay? Moses tells them, this is what I really think of you. He disobeyed God. And it's in that moment that, you know, he must have had that sinking feeling in his stomach when it was done and over. He thought, no, I probably shouldn't have done that. And God says, Moses, you disobeyed me. You didn't follow what I told you to do. And in chapter 27 of Numbers, God takes him up to a mountain. He says, Moses, look out. You see the promised land. You will never enter this land. If you are familiar with that text, maybe you thought, have you ever thought, gosh, why is God being so harsh? It seems kind of hard almost. I mean, he had worked his whole life for this, and really, God, you're not going to let him enter the promised land. If you've ever felt that way about Moses, I bet you've also felt a similar feeling. Did I really deserve that, God? Did I really deserve that thing to happen to me? Have you ever had something happen to you, and one of the questions you asked, maybe not immediately, but afterwards was, did I really deserve that? Should that really have happened to me? I know I messed up, but God, did I really deserve all that? If you're like me, you're probably more like Moses in this situation than you'd like to admit. The problem is that Moses allowed all of his pent-up frustration and anger to sit there and fester, and it turned into resentment, and then that resentment turns into bitterness. He was under a lot of stress. He had a lot of responsibility. God had called him to a great mission. People were constantly complaining to him, but still, instead of trusting God, and I would also say, instead of trusting in the people, the godly people that the Lord had put into Moses' life, he takes it internally and lets it build until it comes out in anger. Friends, as a child of God, as a follower of Jesus, unchecked anger, pent-up frustration, it can be toxic. It can be toxic, and it can even ruin you. It can even ruin your walk with the Lord. And because of Numbers 20, Moses faces the consequences of Numbers 27, which is, you will not enter the promised land. But then Moses, in Deuteronomy 3, he's thinking about that. God, is there any way you could change your mind? He realizes that his life's work is not going to come to pass because of this poor decision that he made. Can you relate to how Moses felt in that moment? Have you ever had something great taken from you only to stand and look and there's really nothing that can be done? It could have been different. It could have been different. History is full of could have beens. We live only about 30 miles from the actual Oregon Trail, which is pretty fascinating. There's places where you can go and you can actually see the wagon ruts that are still there on the wagon trains that went across the prairie long ago. And there's lots of stories about the Oregon Trail. There is a lady in our church who can actually trace her ancestors back to the first pioneers that came over on the Oregon Trail. But one such example is Henry and Catherine Sager. Henry and Catherine Sager set out from Missouri in 1844 with their 6 children on the way to Oregon. And they actually have another child, a seventh is born on the Oregon Trail. So imagine that, you're going out on the Oregon Trail, you're setting out for the beautiful state of Oregon, and here you go, you got your wife and your 6.5, now 7 kids are born on the Oregon Trail, and things are going great. They hit the Rocky Mountains, and Henry dies. The father actually dies, and they bury him near the Green River in the Rockies. Now, this obviously complicates the situation because you're only halfway there, and I drove a U-Haul over there, and I know like halfway it's a big country. Let me just tell you, it's still a long, long ways to go. So Catherine is facing the prospects of leading the rest of her family across the country to reach their destination. But she has taken this badly. She descends into a deep depression to the point where her oldest daughter, described her as perfectly insane. They continue to press on. Catherine continues to grow worse. She actually dies in Twin Falls, Idaho, almost to Oregon. The oldest child, now all of them are orphans, the oldest child, who is 13, has to now lead the rest of the party onward, which that child does, until they reach the Walla Walla Valley, which is only about 2.5 hours from where we live. It's a beautiful country. And there are missionaries there, Marcus and Narcissa Whitman, who are quite famous. That's a story for another day. But they take these orphans in, and you're like, hallelujah, story's over. They all live happily ever after. Well, 3 years later, they are massacred by Indians. The Whitmans are massacred. 5 of the children are taken captive. The other 2 are killed. They ransom them, and they get 4 of them back, but 1 of them actually dies in captivity. And you think, man, that'll just warm your heart right there. Wanted that kind of story. That was a story, though, of what could have been. Now, when they set out on the Oregon Trail, did they think, we're all going to go, and we're going to die, and it's going to be great? You know, they thought, we're going to go, and we're going to live in this land, and we're going to grow tomatoes as big as watermelons. You know, it's going to be great, and we're going to live out here, and God is going to bless us. But then tragedy sets in. It does not turn out like they expected. That's just one example, but there's lots of things in history where it seems like God is opening a door, only shortly after you see that door closing, and you ask God, please, is there a way that you can fix this? God, please, is there a way that you could reverse this? This is where Moses was at. He's asking, God, is there any way you would change your mind and let me enter the promised land? Please, I'm begging you, God. What does God say? Read with me verse 26 through 29. But the Lord was angry with me on account of you. He's referring back to Numbers 20. And would not listen to me. The Lord said, that's enough. That's enough. Don't speak to me again about this matter. Go to the top of Pisgah and look to the west, north, south, and east, and see it with your own eyes, for you will not cross this Jordan. But commission Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he will cross over ahead of the people and will enable them to inherit this land that you will see. So we stayed in the valley of Beth Peor. What do? How do you respond when God says, no, that's enough, don't ask me again? Number 3, so God can do this. Look, He's almost bringing us into this land. God can. Moses, you're not going to enter this land. God, please let me enter this land. God says, no, I'm not going to do it. What do you do when you're at that spot where the door is closed? God says no. Third point and last point is God's plan. God's plan. God can, God please, but then God's plan. Look what happens to him. Moses, he goes to God and God says, that's enough. I will not change my mind. And again, remember, this is not something where it's like, I really want to go to Denny's and get a cheeseburger. Can I do it? No, this is your whole life's work. It's not going to happen. You're not going to cross the finish line, Moses. What do you do? And then God, after saying no, tells him to do what? He says, climb the mountain and look again at the promised land and see where you could have been. I mean, is God rubbing it in here? Is God taunting him? What is going on? I think what God is doing by taking Moses up on the mountain again is God is reminding him of what happened in Numbers 27. When God took him up on the mountain, he said, commission Joshua. Commission Joshua. In other words, God is saying, Moses, you remember what I said. It's not for you to lead my people. It's for Joshua to lead my people. And in Numbers 27, at the end of that chapter, it actually says, and Moses did what the Lord commanded. And Moses, he disobeyed God in Numbers 20, but he obeys God in Numbers 27. And God is reminding him, do you remember what I told you? Do you remember how you did commission Joshua? Do you remember how now you're training Joshua? And Joshua is coming up, and he will be the future. Moses surrendered and obeyed. This is one of the keys in this message. How do you respond? Moses surrendered and obeyed. What do you do in failure? What do you do when things do not turn out like you would have them to? Even after you beg God, please. The only response is Moses' response, surrender and obedience. And submission is a bad word in our culture, is it not? Submission sounds like defeat to us. But ironically enough, when we're dealing with the Lord, submission is actually the place of victory. But how can we do this? How do we submit? How do you surrender like Moses? How do you surrender your life's work? How do you surrender what you wanted to happen? And when failure comes, and when crisis happens, when trouble enters your life, how do you respond to this? Maybe an illustration would help. I'm borrowing this from J.D. Greer, who tells it much better than I did. But I heard him tell a story of a little bird. There was a little bird who was traveling south from Canada to Arizona for winter. And this little bird left later than he should have because he tarried for whatever reason. And he sets out late. And he gets over Oregon and he hits a snowstorm. And he's flying along and his little wings freeze up and get stiff, and he's like, I'm not going to make it, I'm going to have to make a crash landing. And so he looks for a safe place to land, and he lands in a cow pasture. So he makes this emergency landing in the cow pasture, and he's sitting there in the middle of the field, and it's cold, it's snowing, his wings are frozen stiff, and he's thinking, woe is me, I'm not going to be able to fly, I'm never going to make it to Arizona for the winter, I'm going to die here in this pasture. And as he's sitting there, a cow comes and walks by, almost steps on the poor little bird, but steps over him and then proceeds to drop a pile of manure on top of this little bird. He's thinking, man, it has just gone from bad to worse. The situation could not get any worse. But the manure is warm. And so it starts to warm the little bird's wings. He starts to thaw out in this steaming pile of manure. It's like, all right, I'm going to be able to fly again. And he starts wriggling up into the top of the pile, and he is so excited, he starts to chirp, 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 chirp. Well, there was a cat in the pasture. And this cat hears the little bird chirping. And the cat comes over and actually digs him out. Hallelujah! He's going to get out of the pile, but then the cat eats him. The end. Story over. Okay, so the moral of the story, which I thought was pretty good, it says, not everyone who drops manure on you is your enemy. Not everyone who drops manure on you is your enemy. Not everyone who digs you out is your friend. And number 3, sometimes it's better to just keep your chirper shut and wait for the end of the story to happen. That third point is kind of the key, though, to what we're going for in this message, and it's comical. But how many times do you face a tragedy or a setback, and in your limited capacity, your first thought is, let me get out of this as quick as I can? Do you do that? When something bad happens, you think, we need to fix this. We're going to fix this. This is how we're going to fix this and get out of this and correct this, and we're going to get out of this as quick as we can. Whereas God might be saying, I want you to stop. I want you to stop, and I want you to actually rest in that trouble. I don't like that. I don't like that message. That is not something that appeals to me at all. But this is what God is doing to Moses. God is saying, Moses, I know you don't like this, but this is the way it has to be. My man right now is Joshua. I know you're disappointed, but I want you to stop, wait, rest, train Joshua because he is my man. And Joshua would actually go on to be a great military leader, God's man for the job, and lead them into the promised land, which Moses would have not been good at all. That was not Moses' personality. In fact, Moses didn't even want to do what? He didn't even really want to lead them in the first place. God had to twist his arm to do that. But Moses was a teacher. He was that kind of leader. He was the guy for that job. God was removing him and putting in Joshua. Now, did Moses know what was going to happen in the future? No. Did Joshua know what was going to happen in the future? No. But who knew? God knew. Now, let me make it back to you more personally in your situation. Do you know what God's going to do with that cancer diagnosis? Do you know what God's going to do with that job you got fired from or got laid off from because of the coronavirus or loss? Or do you know what God's going to do with that separation or that divorce that you went through? Or do you know what God's going to do with that loss of that child or that great grief that you went through? No. In fact, I would go as far as to say you may never have the answer to that on this side of the river. But God knows, and God is working a plan that's bigger than Moses. God is working a plan that is bigger than Joshua, and God is even working a plan through you and in you that's even bigger than you and you could ever imagine. But you can only see it, realize, if you do what? You stop and you rest in that trouble and in that tragedy. That is a hard thing to do. You know, when you get that pile of manure dropped on you, or whatever it is, you think, this is something I'm never going to recover from. You don't know what God is up to. You don't know how God might even use an evil thing for His glory. Sometimes it's best to wait patiently for God to resolve the unfolding story in your life. Moses set out from Egypt and never got to lead the children of Israel across the Jordan River into the promised land. Does that mean that Moses was a failure? No. No, it does not. Of course not. It means that a good God was capable of even using a broken, sinful man for His glory. And let me tell you today, a good God is capable of using broken, sinful men, broken, sinful women for His glory, if you would trust Him, if you would allow Him to do so. But the key element here is you have to trust God, even when it seems like your plan is not going to work out. What about you? What about when God says no? What are you willing to do? Are you willing to patiently wait for God, to allow God to work, even in tragedy, even in disease, even in failure? We serve a God who will ultimately redeem us. The application this morning that I wanted you to take for this text, the question I leave you with, the challenge is, what not expected thing in your life? What is it in your life right now that this is not how I wanted things to turn out? What not expected thing are you willing today to submit to God? What is it, and you got to make it personal, what is it in your heart and in your life today that you're willing to say, God, it's okay. And this is not just a stoic, deadpan kind of submission. I'm talking about an active, I don't like it, being honest with God about that, but then saying, God, it's okay. It is okay. I am okay with what you are doing, God. And even if you never see it resolved, you got to know, you have to know that one day God will ultimately redeem you. He might not redeem you from a situation because it might be something where like the door is closed on that like it was with Moses. But He will ultimately redeem you because of what? Because of one reason and one person, and that is the Lord Jesus Christ. Because at one time you put your faith and your trust in Him, and He took away your sin. He justified you before God. You know what justified means? Justified means just as if I'd never sinned. When God looks at you, He sees you through the lens of Jesus. And no matter what happens to you, no matter if all of your retirement, all of your money, even all of your children, all of your grandchildren are taken away from you, you know what? God will ultimately redeem you in eternity with Him. And here's the thing. Have you ever had a dream, maybe even a bad dream, or maybe a good dream, and while you are in the dream, you think, this is real. Like, this is happening. This is real life. But then the alarm clock goes off, or you wake up, and what happens by lunchtime? Or maybe by breakfast? What did I dream last night? You cannot even remember it. That is what it's going to be like on the other side. This life will be like a dream, and it seems impossible. How could I ever get over this? And I'm not trying to discount, or I'm not trying to minimize the suffering that you've gone through, because you might have gone through something where if you told me, it would break my heart. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying God has something greater for you, but you got to trust Him. Has there ever been a point in time in your life where you put your faith and trust in Jesus, and that is your future that awaits you? If not, today is the day to do that. It is simple. All you have to do is believe it's true and then give Him your life. Believe and repent. But I suspect, and this crowd, because I know so many of you, that you've already made that decision. And if you have, I bet you're guilty of this. I bet you have forgotten it. Daily, you have to remind yourself of what Christ has done for you. We forget the gospel. Remember it today, and as you remember what Jesus has done for you, you can face any circumstance. You can face any tragedy, because you know that what is going to happen in the end, ultimately, He is going to redeem me, because He is a good Father, and because He is a good God, and I can trust Him. Would you trust Him today? Lord, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for the way that your word is not just a story with little happy tales about how great it was and how great a life certain people have, but it is a real life story of tragedy and disappointment and pain, and sometimes just excruciating pain. Thank you for giving us that, Father. Lord, I pray that we would see you in the text, and that we would read our situation that we're going through into the text. And Lord, as we see that, Lord, that our eyes would be open and we would be reminded of who you are, and we would know that no matter what we're going through, Lord, you never forsake us. You never leave us. But Lord, you also call us to trust you. You also call us, Lord, to put our faith in you even when things don't turn out like we expected, things don't turn out like we wanted, Lord. Give us the strength to do so, Lord. Remind us of who you are. Lord, we put our faith, we put our hope, we put our trust in you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.